Good evening and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Really appreciate it. A happy Sunday to everyone. I hope you've had a great weekend so far. Before I say hello to the chat, let me welcome the gentlemen that have joined me. Hello, Pedas, and hello, Golgo13. Thank you, guys.
Hey, good afternoon and good morning. Thank you for having us.
Good evening, Purple. I'm glad to be here today.
Much appreciated. Really, really good to see you guys. So let's see who else has joined us today. We have got Chris Persia and we've got Mark, the Bash Brothers. Good to see you guys. And we've got Kaylee D. Hello, sweetheart. Good to see you. And we've got the boss, Loki. Hello, good to see you. We've got SJ Almighty, your Muslim uncle. Good to see you. Let's see who else. Good evening to Louise. Hello, Louise. Good to see you. Snowdub. Hey, Snowdub. Good to see you. Let's see who else has joined. We've got Dave Bob. Hello, sir. Andrew 46 and 2. Welcome. Good to see you. Let's see who else has joined. Make sure I'm not missing anybody. We've got Number One Sci-Fi. Good afternoon. And Firefly. Good evening. And I think I saw Archer Colin. Yes, I did. Good evening to you too, guys. And it's like Melody. Hey, good to see you. And Punkwaddle. Hello, guys. Welcome. So, what I thought we would do today, we've been talking about it for the last few days. We've been letting everybody know what's coming up. Paris had this brilliant idea to pay tribute to Band of Brothers, this TV show. It's 20 years old this year. And I think it's safe to say that this is one of those shows that had a huge cultural impact on people. What do you think, guys?
I think without a doubt, I think you hit it right on the head. I think not only did it have a huge impact on us, but the time that it came out, it was just so, I don't know, I guess kismet, right? It just kind of happened at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize this, but the first episode actually came on, and you and I were discussing this a little bit earlier, Purple, that it was the last Sunday of September that this came on HBO after the 9/11 attacks. And in America, anyway, and Google, I'm sure you remember this too, there just was nothing on television. There were no new TV shows. It was the fall, and normally, especially 20 years ago, new shows started popping up the first, second week of September. None of that was going on. It was constantly news reports over and over again. Mm-hmm. So not only was it a break from all that, but then you watch this and it's just this patriotic swell. And I personally had a feeling of, this is like our Pearl Harbor. This is what was going on. And unfortunately, I was in a situation where I couldn't have joined up. I was in my mid-20s, but I had at the time a broken leg, so I couldn't even think about it. But I look at my nephews now, and if that were to happen today, I don't know how. I mean, one of them already went to Marine Corps boot camp during COVID, so I don't know how I could keep the other ones out. The one that's 17 now would probably beg his father to let him, sign the papers, because that's just how you felt about it.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Gogol? You were over there on the West Coast. Was it kind of the same thing for you? Or closer to it anyway, and much more up north than me. The South's pretty patriotic anyway, but
yeah, it was the same way here. I remember when 9/11 hit and where I was and everything about it. And yes, everything pretty well stopped. Even the metal station here, which here in Idaho, you don't think of Idaho and metal, but they even would take the time to play news reports that were coming in throughout basically the next 2 months. And yeah, it was a massive time of uncertainty, and more or less we got to experience at least in part how everybody felt that was alive when Pearl Harbor happened, and the swell of patriotism. And I was almost 21 at the time when that happened, and I was thinking about joining. I had thought about it before, but I've had leg surgeries that basically precluded me from being able to join. My brothers thought about it, even though they were a little younger. But we all thought about what can we do to do our part to help in defending our country and to help move things along Unfortunately I did not watch Band of Brothers the first time it came around, so I'm new to this, and I've started watching it. And yeah, anytime that you're confronted with a supreme evil, it has to be countered. It has to be stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, and obviously now that you've started watching Band of Brothers, as a lot of people will know, whether you've read the book or whether you've seen the show, it is based on true events. It is based on Easy Company, who were the 5 or 6th, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's correct.
yeah.
Purple, I'm not going to have a lot of time to do this on the regular everyday 10 episode nightly thing. Do you think it would be apropos and appropriate at this time to go a little bit about the background of how the show actually came about? Because you could almost do a documentary just on that, because it was just a certain set of circumstances that hit just
Yes.
right, and it really was kind of amazing how it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to give anyone who's never seen it, or anyone who's going to be watching along with all these great channels as
Right.
they do an episode, I think this would be a really good kind of jumping in point, or a refresher, if you will. So let me start off. So Band of Brothers, it is a American war drama miniseries. It's based on historian Stephen E. Ambrose's non-fiction book of the same title, Band of Brothers. And the TV show was created by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks for HBO.
Yep, that's it. You got the vast majority of it right. That's for sure. It's an interesting thing, and I'm sure people are going to go, "Oh, here comes Patrick talking about New Orleans again." But New Orleans played such an integral part in this, because Stephen Ambrose, as many of you may or actually may not know, was a history professor. He's since passed. Was a history professor at the University of New Orleans, and he is a true 20th century historian. He is a person who very interested in military history, very interested in what the goings on of the 20th century, and one would have to say that at least arguably the peak of the 20th century and the innovations that came out for the latter half of the 20th century certainly were affected by World War II, and he was very interested in that. And he did some research about what was New Orleans' involvement in World War II, and first he was looking to see, were there a lot of submarines that went out of New Orleans, and no, not really, because we're pretty far upriver. People don't realize that. It's not like we're right at the mouth of of a lake or the Gulf of Mexico. You have to go quite a way to get there. But what he did find out was there were these things called Higgins boats, and I'm sure a lot of you know the Higgins boats are those boats that have the front end that drops down and people ran off. If you've seen Saving Private Ryan or episodes of The Pacific, another Stephen Ambrose inspired creation, you would see that those boats and he found out that the gentleman who invented those boats tested them and sold them to the government was a gentleman by the name of Andrew Higgins here in New Orleans. So he ran with that. He loved that idea, and he was like, I want a museum here. And he had a goal well before the World War II museum ever opened up in New Orleans, that he wanted that museum to be here, and he wanted it to be a Higgins boat museum. And it became so much more. So he started writing a lot of things. Actually, his first book was about a glider division that landed and took one of the bridges during D-Day. And then he started saying, well, I want to do something like more epic in scope. And he said, I want to find like a group of people who really did something significant on D-Day. And he found out about, of course, the Screaming Eagles, the Airborne, and how this group dropped in, and that for the next 4 days, like during D-Day and the next 4 days, that the majority of medals that were awarded were to a group of gentlemen from Easy Company, a couple from Dog Company. That's where Ronald Spears and all comes from. And if you've seen all the episodes, you'll know who I'm talking about. And he's like, I have to find out if any of these guys are still alive. So the first person he found, talk about luck, was a guy by the name of Richard Winters, Dick Winters. And like I said, if you've seen any of the show, you know that Major Winters is the actually lieutenant when we first meet him. Dick Winters is the pivotal person behind the show. And not only was he a commanding officer that he led Easy Company and then became a divisional officer and stuff like that, he became the unofficial historian of Easy Company, and he kept meticulous records about his guys both before, during, and after the war. And when Stephen Ambrose found this out, he was like, well, can I use this to write a book? And Richard Winters was like, sure, because you could write 50 books from what I have. And a lot of people did, including Rich. I think, personally, I hope I'm friends with Stephen Ambrose's son. So if you're listening to this, buddy, I don't mean anything against your dad, but when you read Dick Winters' book, it's almost a better book than Band of Brothers, and Band of Brothers is a phenomenal book. Stephen Ambrose wrote many great, including Citizen Soldier, about the Battle of the Bulge. That was phenomenal. But when you're there and you write it down, there's something special about it. But we can never take that away from Stephen Ambrose, because he did bring that. And you have to remember, in 1998, Spielberg and Tom Hanks had just finished Saving Private Ryan. So that was a very popular movie. They were looking for their next thing, not even planning on doing a World War II thing. And when they found this book, one of the two men, I can't remember who it is, said, we've got to buy the rights for this. And I said, this is too big for a movie. This has to be a miniseries. And HBO scooped it right up. And that's where we are now. That's where we came to, this 10-episode, multi-directors, hundreds of actors, thousands of extras, that made this epic miniseries that to this day is still the highest rated miniseries on many platforms, including Internet Movie Database. So I know that was a long, drawn out one. Can you imagine me saying that on Monday night? Loki would kill me. But people need to realize it was one of those things, you hear about how hard it is to get stuff done in Hollywood. This thing was just like, everybody who touched it, they were like, this is magical. Their biggest thing was, and I can understand that too, was casting it. And they had I wish I could remember the casting director's name. Phenomenal casting director. And because I got to tell you, I can't think of, and Purple, you've seen all the episodes. Gogo, you've seen, you're right smack in the middle of it. Yeah. I can't think of one person who I find, this person was miscast. Why did they go with them? They're likable. And when I tell you, when you guys look at the cast list, you're going to be like, there's some famous people in here. Well, not too many of them were famous. I mean, David Schwimmer, who is great in the first episode, he was pretty famous. Yep. Jimmy Fallon was on for like about 6 minutes.
Briefly, yes.
Yeah, but a very true and very important historical point that happened right before they settled in for their winter of the Ardennes. But when you look at that, there's not too many people. But then when you start looking at who came out of that, it's pretty phenomenal, the names of people who were involved in the show. And I don't even want to spoil it for you. Go look on IMDb.
The cast were specifically picked because they bore such a close resemblance to the actual gentlemen who were in battle. This cast, like you say, a lot of them were unknown at the time, but because they were so meticulous they wanted it to be as realistic as possible and to honor the gentlemen that took part. I think, like you say, they really did a great role. And Damian Lewis, who plays Richard Winters, I think I couldn't imagine anybody better for that role.
Nope. I 100% agree. I 100% agree. And I think, I think so many people knew Ron Livingston, who played what was his name? Lewis Nixon. A lot of people knew him so well from the great and funny movie Office Space. But boy, did you forget about that after the first 5 minutes of the show, because he truly became Lewis Nixon. He really did. He was phenomenal in that too.
He was. Yeah. Just going through the cast, they had such strong actors. And not only that, all of the actors really applied themselves to the roles. They with the costuming and the way that they slept on set, a lot of them, they really committed to these roles that they were given.
This one feels very meticulous in all aspects. Just from the few episodes that I have seen so far, there is nothing about it within this that makes me feel that I'm anywhere other than in the early 40s to mid 40s, either during boot camp training, going through Currahee, or when they finally do get shipped over to England to stage and get ready for the invasion, having those delays. Everything about this, you're right, from the casting to the acting to uniforms, weaponry, everything about this was spot on and perfect. And you're absolutely right. This was a seminal moment for HBO and for the country at large. This was that lightning in the bottle that only happens once, and trying to recreate it is extremely difficult, as we know.
Right.
But
and I noticed, if I can interrupt real quick, Ogle, I noticed Archer Collins. I'm not real good at following chat, guys, so don't get upset with me if I don't notice something you said to me. But he said, that answers some of my concerns about Damian Lewis being on the show, who played Dick Winters. I don't know if anybody knows this, but Archer, I'm letting you know this for sure. Dick Winters was the only person that they went to and said, if you don't like so-and-so playing your part, we won't do it. The other ones, they were kind of like, oh, we really hope you like so-and-so, because most of these guys did meet their counterparts. If they were still alive, they did get to meet them. Dick Winters 100% signed off on that redheaded English guy playing him. He was very happy with him. He was a very respectful person. He knew his history about World War II, and I don't think it bothered him at all, the fact that he was English, or frankly, I found this part a little bit funny too, a tad bit shorter than the real Dick Winters. But I will tell you this, Purple is right about this. If you put pictures of them side by side, especially a frontal shot with that jawline and everything, they really do look a lot alike at that age. They really do.
They do. And I think this comes down to one, I think at the time, it's definitely what your country needed. You needed this something to kind of swell, to get behind with the patriotism. But it was also a huge gamble for them to take. At the time, this was one of the most expensive series ever made. I think the budget was 125 million. So that averages out 12.5 million per episode.
Yeah. It's an expensive TV show, and 20 years ago, too. And 20 years ago,
that is really expensive.
Yeah. I will tell you this, it was a good gamble, though, because it has paid off for them. They have made that back.
Oh, gosh, yes.
25 times over, at the very least, and the accolades alone that it got. There's a new set that's been released. I don't know if it's out in 4K or not yet, but I can pretty much guarantee that it will be, because it just sells so well. It sells so well. That really cool. It'd be fun to see if anybody in chat, if you had that, let us know. That really cool grayish tin of DVDs, and then the Blu-rays came out, and they were pretty much in the same tin, but instead of the bottom saying DVDs, it had the little blue line with Blu-rays. Of how many people own that, because I remember as soon as I could buy it, I think it came out as early as Christmas. They were smart, right? They knew, let's jump on this while it's hot. I think it was at that Christmas I actually bought it, and was a Christmas gift to myself. I wrapped it and put it under my parents' trees, and they laughed, but then they proceeded to borrow it from me and watch it for 2 weeks before I got it back and brought it to my house. But it's just a phenomenal miniseries, and just, even if you're not a World War II historian, it's such a fascinating view of life and friendship and the military and what that time was like back then. It really is. I think it hits on all cylinders. I really do.
It does, and I think it does a fantastic way of showing friendship, camaraderie, brotherhood. One of the things that we always talk about, is community, and this is one of the things that was shown so well within this show. Platonic friendships that are sometimes undervalued in real life, but you see it in this show, and you feel for the characters, for these men that went through this and lost people.
Absolutely. And one of the things that they do, and I don't want to talk too much about the first episode there again, but one of the things that you do notice, and we won't have a lot of time to spend on this tomorrow, so this is actually very good that it worked out this way. Is that you see the show starts off right with you see these old gentlemen talking about, oh well, when this happened, I was on the farm and I decided to join. And you see these old guys, and it becomes apparent to you right away that these are gentlemen that were part of this show, right? We're going to see a 50-year-old younger version of these guys very soon here.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start realizing, like, there's no way these guys were in D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, that these guys, went to the end of the war and were ready to go and fight in the Pacific. Because, we look back at that now, it's like, oh, well, World War II was over for them. No, none of these guys knew if they were going to go to the Pacific or not. They had no idea what was going to go on with Japan. Most of them didn't think they were going to end the war in Japan soon, because nobody knew about the bomb at the time. But when you think about it, you realize pretty quickly, not all these guys are going to get through. So who am I seeing here? Because they don't put underneath
No,
Dick
they don't.
Winters. You don't know who Dick Winters, and I didn't. I didn't know till the very end. I was just like everybody else. I didn't go on the internet and try to spoil it for myself or anything else like that. And boy, there again, when you talk about the history behind the show is very fascinating, and the thing that really engages me. But the technique of movie making with this, it's pretty phenomenal. What a great concept. Because, right, Purple, I mean, you see, Gogol hasn't been there yet, but in episode 10, you find out who all those guys are. They finally tell you.
Yes.
And you're like, wow, okay, that's who made it. And I won't spoil it for anybody, but there was one gentleman who did that, met his counterpart, recorded all that stuff, was lucky enough to get to go to the Emmys and be there. And they made arrangements so that any veteran from Easy Company could go, and died about a month after the Emmys. So he really, if anything else would have been different, he wouldn't have made it to the end. I'll let people know who that was in episode 10.
Yes.
And it's a beloved character, but you're like, I'm so glad he got to make it to the end and get to see, you know what I mean? What a great thing. It would have been so sad. And there was actually a couple of people, a character who died right before they signed the things for this, who could have been interviewed, but unfortunately died about a year before all of it started filming, because the filming for this took a long time, guys, over 18 months of actual filming.
It was a lot went into this. Do you think that the use of the interviews makes it so much more poignant, because it kind of hits home to the audience that these are, real gentlemen? They lived it. Yes, we're seeing a fictionalized version of what happened, but it is as close as possible to what really happened.
Oh, absolutely. This, excuse me, without that, had they chose not to do that, this would not have had the impact that it did. And you're absolutely right. When you're talking about nonfiction or historical events, and still having the people that lived through it being able to tell their story or to be able to contribute to it, yeah, had they not had that, it would not have had the impact that it did. And I do want to add one extra thing about this particular time. As many things that may be wrong with Hollywood and with certain people, this is one thing that both Steven Spielberg and of course my mind just went blank, Tom Hanks, yep, they both were very huge about supporting the vets from that, because prior to that, they didn't really have any things within the recent time, within the past 20 years. And once the 2000s came around, it was getting to that point where those that did serve were already starting to pass away because of their injuries at 60s or 70s or their 80s. And my one uncle who did serve in the Pacific, he had died in 96, so he wasn't able to see it. But my other uncle, he was able to see this, and he was alive at that time. So this happened just right at that point where we still had enough of these guys still alive to get their records, to understand what they went through, have it all put down, but then being able to get the World War II Museum started, get that piece of our history cemented, and then being able to present to all of them the story of these gentlemen from Easy Company and the sheer hell they went through. And in my notes from the first episode, I have written down War is hell. Training is hell. Everything about war is hell. And unfortunately, those that do go through that, there's anybody that becomes a soldier can probably attest to this to a point, that when you do join and you know that you're going to go into a situation where you're going to have to make the choice to defend yourself and take somebody else's life, there's a little piece of you that gets changed and taken from you. At least in my eyes, that's what I see. And from most of the people that served in World War II, they for the most part kept certain things to themselves. Whereas in modern times, going
Very
to
true,
Nam
very true.
and all the things with Vietnam, then going through the first Gulf War, and then going through everything that we've gone through over the past 20 years. It's good that we now have a better support system for our soldiers, but at the same time, we're still failing in certain aspects, especially with the mental health. And maybe it's just the difference in how people were raised, the time, what they could do for fun, what they couldn't do for fun, just the harshness of survival. Even, coming out of the Depression and still being in the Depression when this happened, people didn't have the time to sit around and say, gee golly me, what happened to me? They had to work. If they didn't work, they didn't eat. We didn't have the coddling nature of certain aspects of government that we do now. And I do believe that played a major role with these gentlemen when they went to war and when they came back, that they, even if they did have problems, I don't recall ever seeing any type of major study or anybody really saying or complaining about how their parents treated them because they suffered from PTSD from the war, which I'm fairly sure most of them, if not all of them, suffered some form of it. But it's a lot more prevalent now than it was then. And I don't know if it's just because we actually focus on it and we're more aware of it, or if it's just the nature of the human from that time. I can't really say.
Yes, it is hard to say, and as you say, it is heartening, definitely, to see such care taken now. We must honour the veterans. Anybody who is willing to lay their life on the line to protect their country deserves the utmost respect. And I think shows like this proves why it's so important to be as honest as possible with what actually happened, the good and the bad. But as you say, this is probably, if not the best example of a dramatized World War II.
Without a doubt, I think that not only is true, but I think it made it very real. And I don't know about you guys or the people in the chat, but I found a lot of people after this show came out, when it started doing some research and started doing things, it was very interesting. There was a gentleman, if you're familiar with the show, um, that was a private, and I don't know if I'm trying to decide if I want to say his name or not. I'm trying to decide whether I do or not. But he is a gentleman who had actually written a book. He was a writer, and that manuscript sat untouched for 4 years. I think he wrote it in, but after he passed away, his family took it and said, hey, he was in Easy Company, would you go? And boy, publishers were like, yes, we'll give you $100,000 for it, and 20% of the book. And he wrote a very good story. And it's funny because I think that if this wouldn't have happened, you would have never gotten that interested. And boy, I tell you, it really did. World War II books started flying off the shelf. You wouldn't have had The Pacific, which is a great miniseries, but does not have the heart that this has. And my family, we're Marines through and through. I mean, generational. But and it's hard because the Pacific was such a different theater and in many ways a harder road to hoe. And I don't take anything away from anyone in the European theater at all. I don't, but it was just very different. So it's hard to get that same feel. But you would have never had the Pacific, and now we have another one coming out about the Air Corps, which of course became the Army Air Force, which is now the U.S. Air Force. Neither one of those two miniseries would have been made if it wasn't for this. And 20 years later, there's still that renewed interest, right? And
It
World
is,
War
yeah.
II and what happened there because of this show, because of the books, because of these men being involved in it, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And as you say, this came after Saving Private Ryan, which came out in '98, I believe. Um, and that was incredibly successful. That kind of reignited people's interest, I suppose you could say, in World War II. And the stories of the regular guys that just went out and were just doing what they were told to do. They were there to do a job, and they did it unflinchingly.
Yeah, almost like they didn't have a choice, you know, because in a lot of ways they
We didn't have
didn't,
a choice.
you know,
Yeah.
right, exactly. Purple, I don't want to put you on the spot because this is your show, but I have to ask you, you as a person from England, from the UK, as a European,
Hmm.
how did you view the show, and what do you think, and what are your feelings about the Americans? And because of Hollywood, right, it's usually these great American war stories, but we know that World War II had so many people on the Allied side
Hmm.
fighting this war and everything. I'm just wondering, how does that sit with you? How did you feel about it when you first saw it? How do you feel about it now, um, as someone
Well,
who enjoys pop culture and history?
well, for us, it was brought by the BBC. They paid for it. They broadcast it, and that's when I first watched it. We watched it the same as you guys. They aired it uninterrupted over a 10-week run, and it was the same as you. It was incredibly popular. Um, I know, this is kind of joking that America came in and saved Europe, but we work together. You know, it's cliche to say that we have a special relationship, but we do. We always have done. We stand side by side, and I hope we always will do. Europe needed America, and America stepped up when when they when the call went out, and I think that really kind of cemented this relationship that we've had ever since. And
Yeah.
to have a drama that shows both sides, and the good and the bad. It shows the Americans, it shows the British, it shows the French. We even get a little bit of background on the Germans, uh, but it's all honest, and I think that is a very difficult thing to do. But as you say, it is based on true events.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I think, Pat, you mentioned this once already, but a lot of people, especially anybody that hasn't served in the military or are, millennials or Gen Zers, they don't really know or understand the consequences of everything that came from this, dealing with the Cold War, dealing with the Soviets and communism and the spread of that afterwards. But, the Germans, they they were on the cusp, had certain events, one or two events, had they gone just slightly different, they would have won. A country of their size with as many people as they had a pretty good size army considering everything, but they brought everything to the brink. That's a very hard thing to fathom in this day and age, but
Hmm.
Yeah,
they did and had
they did, and let me tell you, I don't think people realize just how on the precipice we were of that happening, because we think about the Nazis and they were terrible in but the Germans won over a lot of hearts and minds both in America and throughout Europe. So there were a lot of people that were sympathetic to them. But people think, and I never want to take that away from them, the Japanese were a heck of an opponent, and they had
Hmm.
pretty much brought China to their knees at this time. I mean, if you talk to anybody that was alive in Australia during World War II, they will tell you they were terrified of the Japanese, and those guys aren't afraid of much. Australians are a pretty hardy group of people, but rightfully so. They were brilliant because, I mean, the Philippines fell in a matter of days. I mean, that's, when you think of it, that's phenomenal. These guys, they were serious. And I for one will never take away from the United Kingdom what they did during World War II. It's funny, Purple, you and Ramblin' Canuck and Loki and Dave Bob were talking about, of all things, space and above and beyond on Friday.
Yeah.
And Loki was saying about how minimal the radar was, but just how that little thing played that little part that helped Britain win the Battle of the Skies, right, over the Channel, and kept the Germans at bay. Because if Britain would have fallen, it would have been over with. The Americans would have they might have well just fought the Japanese and just said, well, I guess the Europeans are Germans now, because that's how it would have been. But that happy little circumstance and that group of less than, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Purple, right? Less than 4,000 people, right? That
Yep, less than
flew, took care of
4,000.
those planes, the mechanics, the ground crew, the command, the infrastructure, the people that ran the radar stations, the intelligence officers. That was less than 4,000 people that saved all of the United Kingdom and Ireland, frankly, too. Because Ireland would have fallen. They would have either been sympathetic with the Nazis or not, but they still would have been ruled by them if that would have
Yes.
happened. So that's incredible. And it's not just luck or happenstance. It really was people having enough foresight to be aware of those things and say, we've got to have this in play.
And
Thank
having the right
goodness.
leaders. Yeah.
Right.
Had Neville Chamberlain remained in power,
Uh,
your country would have fallen. And it's
It would have,
fortunate that
yeah.
Winston Churchill was able to win and become prime minister, because without his fortitude and his willingness to draw that line and say, no, we will not fall, we will stand against you, if need be, to the very last man, woman, and child. That's exactly what was needed until we were drawn into the war and were able to come and reinforce everybody and help
Mhm.
get the push to push back on them. And when you think about it, the invasion happened in 44. We were done in just a little over a year. But within that year, some of the most ferocious fighting ever recorded in the history of man took place. And when you speak of the Japanese in the Pacific, they have quite a few people, a little larger than Germany. They had about the same size army, but they absolutely were beyond ferocious. They terrorized everybody. And the Chinese, with their, even at that time, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, were absolutely frightened to death of them.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a
So,
massive psychological blow.
oh yes. So I'm just fortunate that we had the ability at that time to wage a two-front war, because that,
yeah.
yeah,
And it was
it wouldn't
because
have
of
been pleasant.
people forget it was because of our allies too. I mean, you don't think of this, but the regular army from India, what they contributed and fought on both fronts, just the outstanding work they did. And this is such a small picture of World War II. Also, I found it very interesting. I did a little bit of research, and as you know, they had about a 50% attrition rate, right, of paratroopers, either guys that couldn't do it because of health reasons, or you see one guy, he got kicked out, right? He got kicked out of the paratroopers because he took a can of peaches
Yes.
out of the cafeteria. It's very interesting to see. Those guys were still really physically fit guys who wanted to fight. They were athletes and stuff, which most of them were, um, that tried out for and became paratroopers. But a few of those men actually found their way over to the First Infantry, and some of you will know the First Infantry is the Big Red One, right? There was a Mark Hamill, Lee Marvin movie about the Big Red One, which was kind of a corny movie, but boy, they did a pretty good job of showing how much those guys fought. They were everything, right, from North Africa to Italy to D-Day. They were involved in the Battle of the Bulge. They saw it to the end. And it's funny, some of those guys that washed out of the paratroopers actually found themselves as replacements in the Big Red One, and actually saw more action with the First Infantry than they would have with staying with the Easy Company. And it's just incredible. So, like I said, you're looking at one little picture of this huge thing going on. That was just, like I said, it was, if any one thing would have went wrong or worse, right? If anything would have happened it could have easily went the other way. We look at it now in hindsight, but the Battle of the Bulge, right, when the band of brothers are in the Ardennes forest and they're fighting that could have easily turned the other way. And Germany could have said, you know what, we're not going to surrender, but we're going to fortify 100 miles out from around Germany, and we'll be able to hold everybody off for 20 years. And they would have. They absolutely would have been able to do that.
They would have
And it
dug
was
in.
just
Yeah.
it
Yep.
was just the tenacity of the paratroopers, the flamboyant but yet brilliant guys like Patton, Eisenhower, even Montgomery. I mean, let's be honest. Market Garden was a little bit of a misstep, but I'll never take the North Africa would have never been one without Montgomery, so I'll never take that away from him and the fighting forces of the United Kingdom. So when you put all that into the thing, it is a big picture, and that's why there's some people. If you could get a whole degree on the history of World War II, and you could write a whole dissertation just on one action that occurred during one battle during one period of time in World War II. It's that epic of a scope, without a doubt.
Yes, let me ask you guys, do you think that we're getting to the point now where people are starting to forget about the sacrifices that were made for World War II? Do you
Oh
think
yeah.
because our veterans have sadly passed on now, other than things like the Band of Brothers, the shows, the books, people keeping their memory alive? Do you think that it's fading from the general consciousness?
Yes. Yeah. They're pretty much, when it goes to the current generations, pretty much anybody younger than a Gen Xer, they don't have that tie. Most of those people, their parents or their grandparents are more from the Nam era, which has its own set of difficulties and circumstances surrounding it. But whereas our generation, my generation, our parents were either the ones in Nam or before that, or my grandparents were the ones that were in the war. So I have that direct tie. I remember
Yes.
what they've told me, and for me, it's a lot easier to remember and to understand history because we were taught it. Whereas these younger kids, they're not being taught in the same method that we were. They're not being taught the same things that we were. They don't have that tie to people that did have to sacrifice. It's not like how it was with this, the past 20 years. We as Americans, anyways, when the quote unquote war on terror was started, we didn't have to sacrifice anything. In fact, we were encouraged to spend till we bled to keep the economy going and all that. Whereas back then, anything, rubber, anything that could be used to help the war effort, whether it be rubber, metal, food, etc., they were asked to sacrifice and to give what they could for the war effort. And with where I live, we have an old naval ordnance plant. They used to make the big guns that went on battleships that went out to the Pacific to fight. And we still have those buildings. So my town does still have those ties, even though they're not used for any military purpose in this day and age. But yeah, the younger kids, they don't have that same tie or that same level of education, real education that we had.
Yes, and you can, read it, and you can read as many books as you like, but unless you can actually talk to someone who was there and lived it, I think you don't get the same connection. You were talking about your parents and grandparents, and my grandparents were obviously a part of that. My grandmother actually painted Spitfire planes because that's in the area where I live. That's what was built. The Spitfire was built in the Midlands, and she almost painted herself off the wing of a plane once because she started from the body of the plane and worked back to the tip. She only just realised once she got to the end and there were a bunch of American GIs underneath her ready to catch her, which I always thought was a really funny story.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that I agree with Gogol. I think he's right, but I do want to be a little bit positive, and I will say this: I think if you give kids access to it, they will like it. Now, obviously, in my family, they're very interested in it, but then again, we're a very military oriented family. But there are a
Yep.
lot of kids that want to be out there, and there are a lot of good projects out there where they are getting the living history of these veterans still to this day. There's still a nice amount, smaller every day, not millions,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not even hundreds of thousands right now, but more than 100,000 of these vets that are still alive, and they are recording their experiences. And it's one of those things, and I say this: if you have a nice percentage of people, I would say 10%, who educate themselves on this, who understand the importance of that sacrifice, you still have a chance as a country, as a society, as a culture. And I think we certainly do have that. And I take some real comfort in that. I really do. I think the vast majority of people, I don't think they are aware of the sacrifices that a veteran who got out of the service 2 weeks ago has. And I'm a person who, I think anybody that puts themselves in harm's way, I don't care if you say, well, my brother was just in the Coast Guard and he worked at a weather station. It doesn't matter. You still put yourself in harm's way. Do you think the guys that were cooking in tents during the Battle of the Bulge that found themselves fighting, and why, as a Marine, you have to qualify with your rifle and all annually? Do you think they cared that well, I was supposed to be a clerk and then they ended up fighting? You put
Mm-hmm.
yourself in harm's way, you earn that respect as far as I'm concerned. And certainly if you were in combat, we owe you an even greater debt. But I think there are some people out there that remember, and I hope we turn that around. I think in the next 10 years, I don't know about where you're from, Purple, but in America, it could go either way. I think you could have a population that, just like after Vietnam, would spit on veterans returning from war and calling them baby killers. You probably have some people that are like that now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I like to think that at least the vast majority of people realize what it is. And I will tell you this: the one thing you can look at, they're not perfect, but if you talk to anybody that was in a VA hospital, a Veterans Administration hospital, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, compared to a VA hospital today, at least we fixed that. Because that was it. My father would not go to a VA hospital for the longest time. And it wasn't until my friend started working there as a doctor and said, Mr. David, let me bring you in and show you. My dad refused. My dad wouldn't go get his free prescriptions. He didn't want to have anything to do with the VA because he had heard these horror stories in the 70s and his friends who had to leave because of disabilities and stuff. But that's been fixed. And like I said, they're not perfect places by any stretch of the imagination, but
Mm-hmm.
they're a lot better than they were. And I take some consolation in that hey, there's some people out there that are aware of that and that needed to be fixed. And I know people that work in a VA, and that's getting better every day. And I hope that that continues to happen. And I hope that that's something that kind of embraces us all as a country and as a culture, not just in America, but pretty much throughout Western civilization.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And just looking at some of the comments that we've got coming through, massive thank you to the chat guys for joining us today. It seems to be, that they agree with what you guys are saying as well. So it is heartening, definitely. Um, what would you say to people who have never seen this show? I mean, obviously, we've got this fantastic event coming up. It's kicking off tomorrow on Loki's Mornings of Mischief with the first episode. We've got so many people that are getting involved. And again, this was a brilliant idea. What would you say to people that, one, perhaps have never seen the show or just unsure what it's about?
Watch it. Just plain simple, watch it. However, whichever method that you choose, whether you get HBO Max, whether you can buy the DVD or the Blu-ray set, and I did look, they have not remastered this in 4K, and that was my other thing that I wrote down from the very beginning of this, is this series is screaming out, begging to be restored, remastered, and saved for posterity
Mm-hmm.
in 4K, because this is that type of film, the way it's done, that would absolutely shine and be brilliant in that format. So beg,
Well,
borrow, still do what you have to do. Watch it.
yes, and I will say this to you too. Don't be afraid. Check with your library. Your library may
Yes.
has it both as a physical copy and as a digital download. They've invested a lot and it's a very accessible digital download. I'd almost be shocked if your library didn't have it. I will tell you this. Let's say you haven't seen it yet. Um, Technically, Purple, you're kicking it off because you're bringing it to everybody's attention and riling us all up for the next 2 weeks. But Loki will have the first episode. If you haven't seen it yet and you're still not 100% sure, I'd watch the review and say, just like you'd read a review in the newspaper and go, yeah, I want to now go see this movie. Watch the review, see if it's something you like. I think you'll find that it will be, and then you will go out and invest the time. If you want to see some episodes before it happens, you still have better than 34 hours to see the first episode. Go out and get it, find it, and watch it, and see if you like it. I will tell you this, and I want to reiterate it to it. I mean it when I say you don't have to be a lover of World War II or of war history, of military history, to enjoy it. It is truly, um, you could just as well say it's a story about friendship and camaraderie, and the guy looking out for the guy next to him. That is truly what it is. It's truly a band of brothers. It's not just by happenstance they came up with that name for the book or for the miniseries. It really is that, and it's at the end of the day, it's a story, especially of two guys who became lifelong friends because they were thrown into a situation that, as different as they were, had a common goal, which was we're going to get as many people through this as we can, and we're going to win this thing. And gosh darn it, they sure did, didn't they?
They absolutely
Yes, we
did.
did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we had to, because the alternative to losing that was losing the world. And we, had we lost the world, the Reich, they flat out said we want a 1,000-year reign minimum.
Right.
And had they, as was stated earlier, had Britain fallen, it would have been just that hop, skip, and jump for them to do it. So
yeah, and if you ever doubt you're wrong after you watch Band of Brothers, go watch. I always get this title wrong. Is it The Man in the High Tower?
Yes,
Man in the High
Tower.
Go watch that and see. I think that's a pretty good. I watched that and I was like, I don't know if it would have been this kooky and crazy, but it wouldn't have been that far off. It really wouldn't have been. And there were definitely plans on the table of splitting America up. So yeah, that could have very well have happened, no doubt about it.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think the best way, if you haven't watched it yet, is definitely to watch along with the channels that are doing the individual episode reviews. I think that is you'll get so much out of it.
It's a lot. Purple, would you like me to go over the schedule the first week just in case people want to make a mental note? Like I said, we'll be doing a great job of tweeting it, and certainly Monday night Loki will tell us who's going to have Tuesday night, and Tuesday night those people will tell us. But if anybody wants to just know what the week's like, I could go over that real quick.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
No problem. Well, of course, as you know, and if you have a chance, check out Loki's tweet. It's pretty epic, and he did a good job with just that card, and his intro is going to be amazing tomorrow. But the first week will be on Loki's Warnings of Mischief at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time. Then Ramblin' Canuck will have the second episode. His is going to be at 6 o'clock, and it's for a special reason, and you'll find out why. He's the only one that's at 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. Then, and this is important to note, it's not Echo Base Network, it's Echo Base TV, right? It's Echo Base's second channel that's rocking and rolling, and they're going to have Nick Weiser, 32 Flavors of Nick Weiser, on with them, and they'll be doing episode 3. And then what I said, and Purple, forgive me, I have to recycle this joke. I thought it was just too funny when Culture had us on the other day. Episode 4 will be with, it'll be the most handsome episode of all. It'll be Latino Slant with Matt from Foulball Productions, and they'll be doing the Replacements episode on Thursday night at 7. And a new friend and a new member of our fellowship, a gentleman by the name of Vito the Amazing, who has a channel that's got a nice amount of subscribers, asked to be a part of this, and we all like him, and he's going to have an epic group of people with him, and it will be Friday night. And yes, I know there's a lot of going on Friday nights on YouTube, but join us, and that, you know what, that's why we're posting them. They're there to watch. So if you have a family obligation, you can't make one of our nights, you could certainly watch it again. But Vito the Amazing will have the Friday night episode 5 on his channel at 7 p.m. Central also.
Awesome. And we're going to break for the weekend and then pick up again on Monday with the next 5 episodes, aren't we?
Yes, that is correct. We will be doing that. And we're going to have some good people. I'm still working with the schedule of the second week, because there's some people that are clearing the decks so we can join, because I do want everybody who wants to be involved to at least be able to stream it on their channel, or at the very, very least join us as a guest. And Gogol, you'll be doing Friday night with Vito, right? You'll be part of that massive crew of different
Absolutely.
people. And Vito and Gogol have already made friends, which is another great little aspect about this, is that it's a group of people that are getting to know each other, that, hey, I know who you are, but we haven't really worked together yet. This will be fun. And that's a happy byproduct of doing this little tribute that we're doing for the 20th anniversary, which is my ultimate goal, is to honor those men and women who made this show, who were the veterans behind the show, but also to, foster that fellowship that we've developed out there, and keeping our family closer and tighter.
Yes, and I think this is a brilliant way to do it. Like you say, we're not only honouring the memory of, the gentleman that took part in this, we're bringing to light a brilliant TV show on its 20th anniversary and forging bonds between all these channels, working together for a common cause.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And thank you for doing this today, and thank you for staying on top of it and encouraging me, and bringing me on YouTube for the first time. You were a real inspiration for this too, and we want to thank you for that.
You are absolutely welcome. It was my honour to be asked to take part in this. I was incredibly excited when you first described it to me. I thought, this is such a brilliant idea. And then when you kind of went into detail about all the channels that were getting involved, I thought, this is amazing.
Absolutely. It is amazing.
And let me say a huge thank you to Phoenix Tangent, who sends us a $5 super chat. Big thank you, guys. As you probably noticed, I did turn off monetization today. I didn't want it to be about super chats or super stickers. This is all about honoring the memory, talking about this amazing show, and highlighting this event that people are going to be taking part with. But a massive thank you, Phoenix Tangent. Thank you, sweetheart.
Well, that's great. And I didn't know you were doing that. I was wondering why Mexican Iron Man wasn't throwing his money around today and saying, "Woo, you guys are great. Band of Brothers is the best show ever made." Now we know why, because Purple was being respectful. So good for you.
What I would like to do, with your guys' permission, I'd like to make a donation to the Veterans Association. So whichever one that you could recommend, either the one in New Orleans, towards the museum, whichever you think would be the most appropriate, I would like to do that.
Awesome. I will investigate that, and I'll talk to Gogol, because Gogol stepped up for us at the last minute to join us so that we'd have a third person with a different perspective. And if that's okay with you, Gogol, we'll talk about that and send Purple a message in the next day or two, and we'll find the best place that will do that. If you're okay with that, sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you,
Awesome.
sir. Appreciate that. And thank you, Purple. That's very generous of you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
very
guys.
generous.
Much appreciated. As you say, our veterans deserve all the respect that we can give them. So, guys, in closing, I think that this is going to be a fantastic event. I think there's nothing like this on YouTube at the moment. I am so excited to see each channel take on this different episode, to see people's perspectives, to see people get excited about this show, introduce it to people that possibly haven't seen it, or to rekindle people's memory of this show, because as you say, it is the 20th anniversary.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. And like I said, it just happened to fall at a good time, and it just made a lot of sense. And I want to thank everybody that has been involved in it and has encouraged me, and just the people who are going to watch it. I think it's I think it's phenomenal. So if you're out there and you're available to join us in chat, it really would mean a lot to everybody if you could be there and encourage us to go on, because that's why we do it. We do it for you, to inform you and to honor those people. And the more people that know about it, the better it is.
Absolutely.
It'll live on longer for that, for sure.
It will keep
So
it
thank
in.
you all. Thank you all, actually, yes.
Thank you. Keep it in people's, memories. Keep the memories alive. So massive thank you to Perez, and a huge thank you to Golgo13 for joining me today, guys. I couldn't have done this without you. I really appreciate it. A huge thank you to the chat, you guys. Without you, there wouldn't be a show. So thank you all so much for joining us today. A massive thank you to Loki for making that amazing intro. He worked very hard on it, and I think it looks incredible. So thank you, boss, for that one. And I think all that is left to be said is look out for episode 1 tomorrow on Mornings of Mischief, tomorrow evening.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We'll see you all there.
See you there, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and thank you.